pointing out the Goldstein figure, because Goldstein wrote the book that defines the party's negation. But the inner trick is the party wrote that book.
Yeah.
Because they control the mind even of their enemies. And there's an amazing scene with O'Brien in his ministry where he's turned the TV set, he's turned the screen off so they can't be listened to, and he's dressed in black, and Julia and Winston, who he knows are lovers, dressed in denim, dressed in blue serge, are with him in the office. And they talk about Goldstein's book, and O'Brien says later on, I partly wrote that book, of course. But no book's written by an individual, all books are written by committees, because the individual mind can never be trusted. So everything's done by committee. So they control, because that book is true. The party degrades itself, denigrates itself, tells you pretty explicitly what's going on and why, but never why they're doing it. So if you provide your opposition with the mental feed that they need in order to oppose you, you partly control them. And this is a very old idea, but in the 20th century, when mass propaganda became available for the manipulation of the masses, this was an extraordinary way of behaving. You actually create your own inversion so you can control them. Now, Trotsky, Goldstein, is a figure of the early party who provides the figure of the renegade, the running dog, the one who turns against the purity of the party's mission, and also the scapegoat, the goat that's actually tied with the rope to the tree. All the hatred, all the failures, all the espionage that goes wrong, every battle that's lost, it's the false Goldstein and the deviationists. They are the ones, they are the traitors in every word, behind every lie, behind every false sausage, behind every false statistic. The traitors lurk. Sin, secularized sin really, lurks everywhere, always to be purged in the hate, purged through self-criticism. Under communist regimes, individual party members had to undergo self-criticism on a regular basis. You'd be forced, self-criticism is expected, comrade, you'd be forced to stand up in front of the others and to engage in dialectical critique. I had moments of class evasiveness, I suffered from moments of false consciousness, I had certain religious moments where I denied the material nature of reality and the glory of the party's ascendancy, and everyone would be going, it's all very serious, you know. However, in certain regimes, this could be life and death. Many Polish people post-Gomulka, after 1948, I went to a Catholic school, you did religion 4 periods a week. In those Catholics, ex-Catholic schools in Poland, you did Marxist-Leninism 4 periods a week. And you had to get those lessons right. It was very important. If you made a mistake about the 1844 Paris manuscripts in relation to Grundrisse, you were in error. And that was a serious matter. Western liberals smile cynically about all this because they've never really had to live under the pressure of those sorts of institutions and don't understand what it's like to have to play all those dialectical games and engulf yourself in all those sorts of lies. The irony is that, broadly speaking, working class children weren't exempt, but as long as they just prated a few simplistic slogans, it was all right. Because they were the ones for whom it was done. The party wanted to control the minds of people who can think, not those who in a sense follow and who are physical and who need an architecture within which to be. So the very modern totalitarianism understands that you have to control the mind first. You control the mind, you control the body, you control the present, you control the past, you dictate the future. The future is the party. The party has 3 slogans. War is peace. Ignorance is strength. Freedom is slavery. And those are on everything. They're on every beer mat. They're on every watch. They're on every sort of tablecloth. They're on every flag. War is peace. Ignorance is strength. Freedom is slavery. And then there's the ubiquitous big brother is watching you. And Stalin's heavy Georgian features, although some people say he was an Ossetian, but his heavy features, looking down on you, that sort of power, that sort of insistence, that sort of mask, because he was wearing a mask. There is an extraordinary picture of Stalin after Kirov's death. Kirov was the Leningrad party leader. He was assassinated in mysterious circumstances, and befuddled lots of Western Marxists and liberals who didn't understand what's going on. And of course Kirov was killed on Stalin's orders to set off the purge, which sort of begins, if you exempt the Ukrainian famine, from the panoply of a politically oriented purge. What he did was Kirov was killed to provide an excuse for mass terror, less in the society than over the elite. Terror over the bureaucracy, terror over the army, terror over the KGB or one of its incarnations itself. Because Kirov was so high up in the regime that if he had been got to, it must be because of conspiratorial forces of an anti-revolutionary tendency at the heart of the Republic. This means that no one was safe, and that you look for the treason and the traitors right at the top, not at the bottom or in the middle. The mass shootings and killings and tortures beforehand that got rid of between a third of a million and a million party members, higher to middling apparatchiks, and members of the armed forces, and that decimated the Soviet higher command before Barbarossa, and were one of the many reasons, partly because their army was in the wrong position in relation to the invasion, because they were planning to attack Germany themselves and were caught unawares, and so on. But one of the many reasons for their collapse in the early days was because vast numbers of their officers had been purged, undergone self-criticism, failed the self-criticism down the plug. But of course, executioners and torturers and invigilators and those who interviewed those who were going to the camps or going to be shot, they themselves could be found guilty of deviation. Because if they made a mistake, or if they had an illusion of consciousness, they showed too much zeal in certain circumstances, if party ideology shifted slightly in a subsequent moment, they themselves could be before the committees. It's just like the French Revolution, but using sort of massed-out technology in a way. And it's all quite deliberate. And there is this amazing moment when Stalin looks down on Kirov, this orthodox way where the body is laid out in the casket, and he looks down on Kirov, and it's a mafia boss looking at a subaltern that he's had killed in order to start a war between clans. And you can see it. I mean, it's just a subjective way of looking at reality, but you can see that Stalin knows in his face what he's done. And Stalin is this odd character that Western propaganda about Stalin has been based on Trotskyism for most of the 20th century. Stalin was actually an interesting and slightly creative man. He was also a brigand and an extreme criminal, addicted psychopathologically, very like Mao, to extremes of sadism and slaughter, which he positively enjoyed and gained pleasure from. Mao certainly had pronounced sadistic features and used to enjoy the physical torment of former party members who'd fallen out with him. Their bodies mutilated would often be exhibited in the streets in order to terrorize the masses into obedience with socialist logic. It's probably psychologically many Chinese have not recovered from this. The full extent of the terror that was represented in Asia by the Cultural Revolution is still not really explored even by quite radical and mainstream Western historiography. Certainly many people in Hong Kong saw enormous numbers of bodies floating out to them when Hong Kong was under British rule, of course. Many of these bodies were partly eaten as well. And many of them were Red Guards who started fighting with each other about moments of dialectical purity, because these bureaucracies have a tendency to start sort of ravening like dogs. They get so wild they start attacking themselves if there's no object to attack at a particular sort of time. This phenomenon also fed in through into many other things. The collapse of discipline that was also ordered, a sort of planned chaos, particularly in relation to the mass rape of German women at the end of the Second World War by Soviet troops, which even today President Putin says, Premier Putin says, never occurred. Never occurred. Western lies, fed by the enemies of Russia. Russia's a national country now, and Putin in many ways is a man to be admired in certain respects. But their old ways die hard in many ways. The interesting thing about those mass rapes, which certainly occurred, to the degree the German communists pleaded with the Soviets to stop them because they were preventing the creation of Ulbricht's state in occupied East Germany. The reason they occurred was because commissars ordered them. And yet at the same time there was such a breakdown in order that order was itself part of the chaos with which it ramified. Stalin said, because all of Stalin's atrocities are ordered and are written down. The Katyn Forest massacre of the Polish officer corps, and there's an interesting quasi-revisionist Polish national film called Katyn, which is available